Okay, so it's Work in Progress Wednesday, so I thought I'd hop on here and talk a little bit about a project that I'm working on because it involves a knitting technique that people tend to have strong feelings about. They either love it, they hate it, or in some cases, they're intimidated by it. So I'm going to talk briefly today about Intarsia. Hey everyone, welcome to Musing Maker. I'm Harriet. I've been a knitter and crocheter for over 40 years now, and a couple years ago I also learned to spin and to weave on a rigid heddle loom. So this channel is where I come to talk about the various challenges that I've set myself and the works in progress and the finished objects that I create in the fiber arts. So in today's video, I'm going to focus on one project in particular that I'm currently working on since it's Work in Progress Wednesday or WIP Wednesday, and that is a vest project. So the vest that I'm working on is called Geek Chic, and I will put the information about the designer below this video and a link to the pattern below this video, and it's a free pattern that's available to everybody. And what kind of intrigued me about this vest pattern is that the back of it is a solid color, but then on the front of it, you work an argyle design. And so when you're working an argyle pattern in knitting, there are one of two ways that you can approach it. So you can basically work the triangle blocks in the background, and then once you've finished that, you can duplicate stitch the lines that go across those triangle blocks onto the fabric. Right? So I decided I didn't want to do that for a couple of reasons. First, I have pretty terrible eyesight, and so kind of having to duplicate stitch a whole lot of little diagonal lines across a knitted fabric just felt like something that I was not going to enjoy doing. The alternative to duplicate stitching an argyle pattern on the diagonal lines on an argyle pattern to create an argyle pattern, the alternative to doing that, if you don't want to duplicate stitch, is to do what's called Intarsia. So the term Intarsia is actually borrowed from woodworking. And in woodworking, Intarsia is basically using small pieces of wood, different, uniquely shaped pieces of wood as an inlay to create a pattern. And it's something that, evidence of it exists from, as early as ancient Mesopotamia and ancient Greek, but it really became an art form during the Italian Renaissance, as did so many things. So the term Intarsia has been transferred from woodworking to knitting. And so in knitting, it's a similar kind of thing, right, in which you have inlaid color on a knitted fabric, right? And so you incorporate those inlays into the overarching fabric itself. So why is Intarsia so controversial, right? As I said at the start of this video, some people really love it and some people really hate it and refuse to do it. And I would say even among the people who love it, I don't mind it. I don't know. I think I love the finished product of it. I don't always love the process of creating something in Intarsia. So that's why I want to talk a little bit about how I convince myself to create the finished product that is the beauty of an Intarsia fabric. Okay? So I want to talk right now about a project that I worked on before I knew anything about Intarsia. So this is something that, kind of has always characterized me as a knitter, is that I will often sort of just jump into a project because I like the look of the finished product and not necessarily think through what's going to be involved in the project. And so I'm going to show you a project that I have right here that I worked on for a very long time during the 1990s. And I think I've talked about this project on a previous video, right? And it's a pattern by Kim Hargreaves. And I'm going to actually hold up the back of it because I think that that's where you can kind of see the Intarsia technique best. Okay, so yeah, this is this is a nice big sample of a very simple Intarsia fabric in which you're just working different blocks of color. And if I flip it inside out, all right, you can see that unlike Fair Isle, where you carry the floats across the back, when you work Intarsia, you do not carry the floats across the back. All right, so you end up with a fabric that looks like that, right? And my ends are not woven in nicely. The thing that made this particular sweater challenging was it was actually cotton, which is harder to work Intarsia in cotton than it is in wool, right? Intarsia, as with Fair Isle, if you work a sticky wool, you're gonna have an easier time of it, right? Because it helps keep those pieces together. And so the current project that I'm working on, I'll show you a piece of that. All right, so this is the front of the Geek Chic vest that I'm working on. Right? And so as you can see, this is what I was talking about at the beginning, right? One option would be to simply, knit these light blue and white triangles as a solid fabric and then kind of go in and put the diagonal lines across it. Given the size of this fabric, I knew I was not going to want to do that, right? I think that I would probably end up blind by the time I was done with it. So there are a few different ways to work Intarsia, and so a lot of times one of the things you'll see that people use are they use bobbins, right? So you can wind yarn onto bobbins, right? And then you just sort of knit across and you carry a bunch of bobbins across the back of your work, and as you come to them, you knit from them. I used to do that. A couple of things I don't like about the bobbins. First of all, yes, you can buy bobbins in lots of different sizes. You can buy them as, some people will also make butterflies of the yarn and carry it across the back. I always ran into two difficulties when I did that. And I used the bobbins on this project, and I really think that it would have gone a lot faster for me if I hadn't. One of the things that happens when you have bobbins on the back of the fabric is, first of all, you have a lot of things dangling off the back of your fabric, which it just kind of doesn't feel maybe like what you're used to if you've never knit that way before. The other problem that I ran into is that the bobbins will, because yarn, is created through twist, over time, the bobbins will twist around on the back of the fabric around each other, right? So you will not only end up with, like, say, 15 bobbins across the back of your fabric, you will end up with 15 bobbins, all of which are twisted around one another. So you have to kind of untwist each bobbin from its neighboring bobbins, and then you have to kind of unwind a little bit of the yarn as you need it. And that can also affect your tension, right? I found that sort of, because it's kind of pulling on the yarn, it can kind of tighten your tension. It can be very hard to get good tension with Intarsia. And so I would say, if you've ever started an Intarsia project and ended up with some kind of wonky looking stitches, just know that that's part of the process with Intarsia. I think it's better to have the wonky stitches that are a little big than the ones that are too tight, because you can kind of adjust and weave in ends on the back and maybe, kind of neaten up your fabric a little bit. And so that's the other thing that I would also point out is that, as the fabric emerges, so as I was working on this last night, I have a tendency to kind of sit there and fuss over it, that, oh, there's a little gap here, or there's a little, this or that. And then I have to sort of remind myself that there's, the next stage of fixing up this fabric is, weaving in the ends on the back. You can neaten things up, and then of course you'll block it, and so that should help as well. So a few years ago, I was reading an interview with the designer Kaif Fassett, and he's kind of one of the best known creators of a lot of really beautiful Intarsia fabrics. And this sweater that I made, this cotton sweater, is by Kim Hargreaves. And like I said, I'll put a link to the project below. I've also worked a couple of, like a blanket project by Kaif Fassett. And in all cases where I know that I'm working a project that's Intarsia, I never work it on a deadline. It's just something that I think it's a beautiful finished object that I would like to have someday, right? And so I'm really strict with myself about not working on it on a time crunch. That said, this is on a little bit of a time crunch because I might use it for my master hand knitters submission. I might not, depending on how it works out. One of the reasons I chose this was because for level 2 of the Master Hand Knitters program, certification program through the Knitting Guild, you have to work on Argyle sock. And I knew that, I've done Intarsia before, and so I knew that I had the basics for how to do it, but I also felt like before I worked in, kind of on small needles with fingering weight yarn, I wanted to kind of do a test run, get some practice working with, a thicker yarn. And so this is Knit Picks High Desert Sport. I will put a link below to this vest pattern. I'm just calling it MHK Vest right now because I don't know if I'm going to use it or not. Really depends on kind of how it turns out in the long run. So in this interview with Kay Fawcett, one of the things that he talks about is, that he says that the best way to work Intarsia is to embrace the tangle. And what he meant by that is that for, the projects that he tends to work on, he simply cuts very long lengths of yarn and just lets it all hang out. And I remember reading that and thinking, oh God, right, that would drive me nuts. But then I thought, well, you're being driven nuts by the bobbins, so which would drive you more nuts? And so I decided to kind of get over that mental hurdle of having lots of messy looking bits of yarn hanging off the back of my project and just try to embrace the tangle. And so thus far, I would say working on this project using the tangle method, where you just simply cut lengths of yarn, and then when you get to the end of the length of yarn, you just join another length of yarn, knowing at the end of it that you're going to have a bunch of ends to weave in. For me, that has actually been less stressful than dealing with the bobbins. So to each their own on that, right? If you've worked in Intarsia and you enjoy working with the bobbins, do you? Some people, I think I said a few minutes ago, will also kind of butterfly the yarn so it's hanging off the back. I tried that method as well. The butterflies on mine just either kept getting entangled with the other butterflies or unravel, or just sort of turning into just long lengths of yarn, right? Not sort of staying put. And also it kind of disrupts the flow of my knitting if I have to keep kind of maneuvering with a bobbin or maneuvering with a butterfly of yarn. Okay, so this was what I was talking about, right? In terms of embracing the tangle. I just have long lengths of yarn here on the back, and you do have to purl and color work. And basically what you do as you knit across, so say I was getting to this point here, right? You just make sure that when you kind of purl the next stitch or knit the next stitch, you're always bringing the yarn up under, right? Because the other trick is that if you don't kind of loop the yarn around, you'll end up with holes right at the point of the color join, right? So, all right, when I'm coming here and it's time for me to switch from one color to the next, right? If I'm switching to the blue, I make sure that it comes under the white and then over. And I can post a short that shows me doing that, but it's pretty much intuitive, right? That you want to always be taking the yarn that you're going to be using from under and under into the, like, from the right, right? So that will help eliminate the holes. Okay, so that's my Work in Progress Wednesday video about the technique known as Intarsia. If you found this video interesting or helpful, please like and subscribe. And if you've had any experience with Intarsia, whether good or bad, or if you've been intimidated by Intarsia, drop a comment down below and let me know. I'd be interested to hear how you've all found Intarsia or working with Intarsia.